Ladies and gentlemen, today we turn our attention to one of the most significant and defining moments of the American Revolutionary War, the Battle of Saratoga. This battle was not merely a military engagement. It was a turning point that shifted the momentum of the conflict and altered the course of history. Fought in the late months of 1777, the Battle of Saratoga was a confrontation that tested the resolve, strategy, and endurance of both the British and American forces. It was a battle that would ultimately determine whether the American colonies would remain under British rule or take a bold step toward independence. To fully appreciate the significance of Saratoga, we must first understand the broader context of the Revolutionary War during this time. By 1777, the war had been raging for over 2 years. The early days of the conflict had seen both victories and defeats for the American forces, but the British remained a formidable power. Their superior military strength, resources, and experience posed an immense challenge to the colonial militias who sought to break free from their control. The British High Command believed that if they could deliver a crushing blow and sever the colonies, the rebellion could be swiftly put down, and British authority would be restored across North America. The British devised an ambitious plan to divide the colonies geographically and isolate the rebellious New England region from the rest of the American territories. This strategy centered on controlling the Hudson River Valley, a critical artery that stretched from Canada to New York City. By seizing this corridor, the British hoped to cut off communication and supply lines between New England and the southern colonies, weakening the rebellion and forcing a swift surrender. To execute this plan, the British launched a three-pronged invasion led by General John Burgoyne. Burgoyne's force, consisting of British regulars, German mercenaries known as Hessians, and indigenous allies, was tasked with advancing southward from Canada toward Albany, New York. Simultaneously, other British forces were expected to move from the west and south to converge at the Hudson River Valley. It was a bold, complex plan that required precise coordination. However, as history would reveal, it was also a plan fraught with challenges and miscalculations. As Burgoyne's army advanced through the dense wilderness of upstate New York, they faced a host of unexpected difficulties. The terrain was harsh and unforgiving, slowing their progress. The logistical challenges of moving thousands of troops, along with their supplies and artillery, through thick forests and across rivers became a daunting task. Additionally, the British underestimated the resilience and determination of the American forces who were gathering to oppose them. The American response to the British threat was swift and strategic. Under the leadership of General Horatio Gates, American forces began to mobilize in the Saratoga region, establishing defensive positions along the route of Burgoyne's advance. These defenses were not hastily thrown together, but were carefully designed to exploit the terrain and create formidable obstacles for the advancing British. Local militias and Continental Army soldiers alike answered the call to defend their homeland, swelling the ranks of the American forces. The clash that would become known as the Battle of Saratoga was not a single engagement, but a series of fierce encounters that unfolded over several weeks. This prolonged struggle would test the courage, strategy, and leadership of both sides in ways that neither had fully anticipated. The outcome of these battles would reverberate far beyond the fields of Saratoga, shaping the future of the American Revolution and the destiny of a new nation. As we delve deeper into the events of this historic battle, it is crucial to recognize that the Battle of Saratoga was more than a military confrontation. It was a symbol of the American spirit. It demonstrated that ordinary citizens, when united by a common cause and guided by capable leadership, could stand against one of the most powerful empires of the time. This battle was not only a turning point in the Revolutionary War, but also a testament to the enduring power of perseverance and the pursuit of liberty. To fully understand the significance of the Battle of Saratoga, it is essential to examine the British strategy that led to this crucial confrontation. By 1777, the American Revolutionary War had entered a critical phase. The British, despite their military superiority, faced an unexpected and prolonged rebellion. What the British military command initially believed would be a brief uprising had transformed into a full-scale war that spread across the 13 colonies. The longer the war continued, the more resources and manpower the British had to expend to maintain control over their American territories. The British High Command recognized that a swift and decisive blow was necessary to crush the rebellion and restore colonial loyalty. At the heart of their strategy in 1777 was a bold and ambitious plan to divide the American colonies geographically. The British believed that if they could separate New England, the heart of the rebellion, from the middle and southern colonies, they could isolate the most radical elements of the revolution and weaken the ability of the colonies to coordinate their military and political efforts. This plan would effectively cut the colonies in half, making it easier for British forces to suppress resistance in isolated regions. By severing the lines of communication and supply between the northern and southern colonies, the British hoped to bring the rebellion to a swift and decisive end. The Hudson River Valley became the focal point of this grand strategy. This vital corridor stretched from the Canadian border to New York City, providing a natural pathway for troop movements and the transport of supplies. If the British could gain control of the Hudson River, they would not only divide the colonies, but also secure a critical logistical advantage. The British High Command believed that such a victory would demoralize the American forces, disrupt the fragile unity among the colonies, and convince many colonists to abandon the cause of independence. The British plan, sometimes referred to as the Saratoga Campaign, was complex and required precise coordination between three separate armies. General John Burgoyne would lead a large force southward from Canada, moving down the Hudson River Valley toward Albany, New York. Simultaneously, a smaller British contingent under the command of Colonel Barry St. Leger would advance from the west along the Mohawk River, aiming to converge with Burgoyne's forces near Albany. Finally, General William Howe, the British commander-in-chief in North America, was expected to move his army northward from New York City to complete the encirclement. If successful, this three-pronged invasion would trap American forces, secure the Hudson River, and sever the colonies in two. On paper, the British plan seemed formidable and well-conceived. Burgoyne's army was impressive, consisting of approximately 8,000 troops. This included British regulars, German auxiliaries known as Hessians, Loyalist militia, and indigenous allies who were enlisted to provide reconnaissance and disrupt American supply lines. The British believed that the sheer size and strength of this combined force would overwhelm any American opposition. Moreover, Burgoyne himself was a confident and ambitious officer, convinced that his campaign would deliver a swift and decisive victory. However, the plan was not without its flaws. One of the most critical weaknesses was the complexity of coordinating three separate armies across vast and challenging terrain. Communication between the three British forces was slow and unreliable, leaving each contingent vulnerable to isolation and attack. Additionally, the British underestimated the logistical challenges of moving a large army through the rugged and densely forested wilderness of upstate New York. Roads were scarce and poorly maintained, forcing Burgoyne's troops to carve their way through thick forests and cross treacherous rivers, significantly slowing their progress. Another major flaw in the British strategy was their reliance on local loyalist support. The British assumed that many American colonists remained loyal to the Crown and would rise up to support the advancing British forces. In reality, however, British harshness toward civilian populations and the growing commitment to independence had turned many neutral colonists against them. Instead of gaining loyalist allies, Burgoyne's army faced increasing hostility from local militias who harassed their supply lines and disrupted their movements. Furthermore, the lack of coordination between British commanders proved to be a fatal weakness. General Howe, rather than marching north to support Burgoyne, chose to launch an offensive against the American capital of Philadelphia. This decision left Burgoyne's army isolated and without the reinforcements they expected. At the same time, St. Leger's advance along the Mohawk River was halted by fierce American resistance during the siege of Fort Stanwix, preventing his forces from linking up with Burgoyne. As Burgoyne's army continued its march south, the American forces under General Horatio Gates prepared to confront them. American commanders recognized the importance of the Hudson River Valley and understood that stopping Burgoyne's advance was crucial to the survival of the revolutionary cause. Local militias and Continental Army units began to gather in large numbers, strengthening the American position and posing a growing threat to the British invasion. What began as a carefully crafted British strategy to divide and conquer the American colonies soon became a campaign fraught with delays, miscommunication, and logistical nightmares. The British plan, while ambitious, failed to account for the resilience of the American forces and the challenges of waging war in the unforgiving wilderness. As the two armies drew closer to the fields of Saratoga, the stage was set for a confrontation that would alter the course of the war and change the destiny of a nation. At the center of the British strategy to divide the American colonies stood General John Burgoyne, a confident, ambitious officer who believed that his bold plan would swiftly end the rebellion. Burgoyne, a seasoned military leader with experience from previous conflicts, was chosen to lead a significant British force from Canada into the heart of New York. His mission was not simply to defeat American forces in battle, but to execute a grand and complex campaign designed to isolate the New England colonies from the rest of the rebellious territories. Burgoyne was convinced that by controlling the Hudson River Valley, the British could crush the revolution by severing the colonies geographically and politically. Burgoyne's plan was part of a larger British strategy, but it was his personal vision and leadership that shaped the details. His primary objective was to advance south from Canada along the Hudson River toward Albany, New York. There, he would link up with two other British forces, one coming from the west under Colonel Barry Street Ledger, and another marching north from New York City, led by General William Howe. This three-pronged approach aimed to trap American forces in New York, cut off vital supply lines, and deliver a devastating blow to the colonial cause. Burgoyne believed that the sheer size and strength of his army would intimidate the rebels and force them into submission. To carry out his plan, Burgoyne assembled an impressive and diverse force of approximately 8,000 men. This army included experienced British regulars, highly trained and disciplined soldiers who formed the backbone of his military power. In addition to these professional troops, Burgoyne's force also included thousands of German mercenaries, known as Hessians. These soldiers, hired by the British Crown, had a reputation for toughness and battlefield effectiveness. The British also enlisted loyalist militia, colonists who remained loyal to King George III, and indigenous allies who were skilled in reconnaissance and irregular warfare. Burgoyne believed that this diverse coalition would give him a decisive advantage over the untrained and poorly equipped American forces. Logistically, Burgoyne's campaign was a massive undertaking. Moving thousands of soldiers, along with artillery, wagons of supplies, and camp followers, through the rugged and forested terrain of upstate New York posed significant challenges. The region was densely wooded, with limited roads and treacherous rivers to cross. Despite these obstacles, Burgoyne remained confident. He meticulously planned for his army's needs, carrying large quantities of food, ammunition, and other essential supplies. However, this slow-moving baggage train became both a physical and strategic burden, making his army vulnerable to American harassment and delaying his progress. A key assumption underlying Burgoyne's plan was that local loyalists would rise in support of the British cause as his army advanced. Burgoyne believed that large numbers of colonists remained loyal to the Crown and would provide his army with food, intelligence, and additional manpower. He also hoped that the presence of a powerful British force would intimidate the American rebels into surrendering without the need for prolonged battles. This assumption, however, proved to be one of his most serious miscalculations. Rather than rallying to his cause, many local settlers viewed the British invasion as a direct threat to their homes and livelihoods. As a result, instead of gaining loyalist allies, Burgoyne's army faced increasing hostility from local militias who used guerrilla tactics to disrupt his supply lines and slow his advance. Another critical flaw in Burgoyne's plan was his reliance on coordination with other British forces, particularly General William Howe. Burgoyne expected Howe to march north from New York City and meet him in Albany, completing the encirclement of the American forces. However, this assumption rested on poor communication and a misunderstanding of British priorities. Unbeknownst to Burgoyne, Howe had decided to pursue a separate campaign to capture Philadelphia, the de facto capital of the American colonies. This decision left Burgoyne isolated, without the reinforcements and logistical support he had anticipated. As Burgoyne's army moved deeper into American territory, the realities of the campaign grew more difficult. The thick forests, swamps, and steep hills of the Hudson River Valley made progress painfully slow. Every mile required clearing roads, building bridges, and ferrying heavy artillery across rough terrain. American forces, fully aware of the British advance, took advantage of the geography to impede Burgoyne's march. Local militias, led by experienced frontiersmen, launched hit-and-run attacks on British supply convoys, further straining Burgoyne's resources. Despite these challenges, Burgoyne pressed forward with characteristic determination. In his mind, victory was inevitable. He believed that the superior discipline of his forces, combined with the disorganization of the American militias, would guarantee success. Yet, as weeks passed and the American resistance grew stronger, the weaknesses in his plan became more apparent. The absence of reinforcements from Howe meant that Burgoyne had to rely solely on the resources he brought with him, which were rapidly dwindling. Meanwhile, the American forces under General Horatio Gates and other commanders continued to swell in number as local militias joined the fight to protect their homes. Burgoyne's plan also relied heavily on maintaining the morale and cohesion of his multinational army. While the British regulars were disciplined, the Hessian mercenaries and indigenous allies had their own interests and motivations. Tensions occasionally flared between these groups, and maintaining unity under increasingly difficult conditions became a major challenge. As supplies ran low and American pressure increased, morale in Burgoyne's camp began to falter. The long marches, constant skirmishes, and harsh wilderness took a toll on the soldiers, who began to question the wisdom of the campaign. As Burgoyne's army approached the American fortifications near Saratoga, the flaws in his plan became impossible to ignore. Isolated from other British forces, burdened by logistical difficulties, and facing a growing and determined American army, Burgoyne's grand vision of a swift and decisive victory was unraveling. Yet, despite these mounting challenges, he remained committed to his strategy, believing that one final push could still deliver the victory he had promised to the British government and the king. Burgoyne's confidence, while admirable, would soon be tested in the fields and forests surrounding Saratoga. His plan, which had once seemed bold and brilliant, was now dangerously vulnerable to the realities of war and the fierce determination of the American patriots who stood in his way. As General John Burgoyne's British Army advanced southward from Canada, the American forces understood the grave threat this campaign posed to the cause of independence. The British plan to seize the Hudson River Valley was not just a military maneuver, it was a strategic attempt to sever the colonies and crush the revolution. If Burgoyne's army succeeded in reaching Albany and linking up with other British forces, the colonies would be divided, supply lines would be severed, and the American struggle for freedom would be in jeopardy. Recognizing the stakes, American leaders acted swiftly to mount a determined defense against the British advance. At the heart of the American response was General Horatio Gates, a disciplined and experienced officer who took command of the Northern Department of the Continental Army. Gates was tasked with organizing and leading the American forces positioned to block Burgoyne's path. While Gates himself was not known as a bold battlefield commander, he excelled in administration and logistics. His methodical leadership style was well suited to the task of strengthening defensive positions, rallying troops, and preparing for a prolonged engagement. However, the American defense was not the work of one man alone. Other capable leaders and local militias would play a crucial role in turning the tide against the British invasion. One of the first challenges facing the Americans was mobilizing enough troops to counter the size and strength of Burgoyne's advancing army. At the outset, the American forces were significantly outnumbered. The core of the army consisted of Continental Army regulars, professional soldiers under the command of Gates and other senior officers. However, these troops alone were insufficient to face the British threat. Recognizing the need for reinforcements, the American leadership called upon local militias from across New England and New York to join the defense. The response was swift and enthusiastic. Farmers, tradesmen, and ordinary citizens left their homes to take up arms, motivated by a shared desire to protect their land and preserve their freedom. These militia forces, though lacking the training and discipline of British regulars, brought unique advantages to the battlefield. Many were skilled marksmen familiar with the rugged terrain of upstate New York. They used this knowledge to harass British supply lines, ambush scouting parties, and disrupt the enemy's movements. Their ability to strike quickly and disappear into the dense forests forced the British to move cautiously and expend precious resources on guarding their flanks and rear. As the days passed, more and more volunteers arrived, swelling the American ranks and providing Gates with the manpower needed to confront Burgoyne directly. While mobilizing troops was vital, the Americans also focused on fortifying key defensive positions along Burgoyne's route. One of the most significant strongholds was located at Bemis Heights, a series of strategically positioned hills overlooking the Hudson River. Recognizing the natural advantages of the terrain, the Americans constructed extensive fortifications under the direction of Polish engineer Thaddeus Kosciuszko. These defenses included earthen walls, artillery positions, and fortified redoubts that would make any British assault costly and difficult. The defensive lines at Bemis Heights allowed the Americans to control the high ground, giving them a tactical advantage that would prove decisive in the coming battles. Another critical element of the American defense was intelligence gathering. American scouts and local sympathizers closely monitored Burgoyne's movements, providing Gates and his officers with valuable information about the size, location, and condition of the British Army. This intelligence allowed the Americans to anticipate British advances, position their forces effectively, and plan targeted attacks on vulnerable points. Meanwhile, the British faced increasing difficulty obtaining accurate information due to the hostility of the local population. American civilians were generally supportive of the Patriot cause, refusing to assist the British and often providing food, shelter, and intelligence to the Continental Army instead. The American defense was further strengthened by the presence of experienced battlefield leaders who brought boldness and initiative to the fight. Among them was General Benedict Arnold, whose aggressive leadership and willingness to engage the enemy played a crucial role in the defense of Saratoga. Despite tensions with Gates over military strategy and personal recognition, Arnold's actions on the battlefield inspired the troops and disrupted British offensives. His ability to lead from the front and take decisive action during critical moments of the campaign would have a lasting impact on the outcome of the battle. In addition to military preparations, the American defense benefited from a growing sense of unity and determination among the colonies. The British invasion of upstate New York was viewed not only as a threat to the immediate region but also as an attack on the broader cause of liberty. This sense of shared purpose galvanized the American forces, fostering cooperation among local militias and Continental Army units. Even those who had previously remained neutral were drawn into the conflict as the reality of British occupation loomed large. The presence of British forces, combined with reports of their harsh treatment of civilians, further solidified public support for the revolutionary cause. Logistics and supply lines also played a crucial role in the American defensive strategy. While Burgoyne's army struggled to maintain its lengthy and vulnerable supply chain through the wilderness, the Americans were operating in familiar territory with access to local resources. This logistical advantage allowed the American forces to sustain themselves more effectively and maintain their defensive positions without the same degree of hardship faced by the British. Furthermore, American control over key river crossings and supply routes meant they could cut off Burgoyne's access to essential provisions, placing his army under increasing strain as the campaign wore on. As the British advanced closer to Saratoga, the American defenses grew stronger with each passing day. What had initially seemed like a disorganized and outnumbered resistance was transforming into a formidable defensive force capable of challenging one of the most powerful armies in the world. The combination of prepared fortifications, local support, intelligence gathering, and bold leadership gave the Americans a significant edge in what was shaping up to be a climactic confrontation. By the time Burgoyne's army reached the American lines at Bemis Heights, the stage was set for one of the most significant battles of the Revolutionary War. The American defenders, once underestimated by the British, had assembled a well-positioned and determined force prepared to fight for their land and their freedom. Each decision, Each reinforcement and each defensive measure taken in the preceding months would contribute to the dramatic showdown that would unfold in the fields and forests surrounding Saratoga. The first major clash of the Saratoga campaign occurred on September 19, 1777, at Freeman's Farm, a critical point along the route General John Burgoyne's British Army was following toward Albany. This battle marked the beginning of a fierce and prolonged struggle between the British and American forces. For weeks, Burgoyne had advanced through the dense wilderness of upstate New York, but his progress had slowed considerably due to harsh terrain, logistical difficulties, and constant harassment by American militia. As the British forces approached the fortified American positions at Bemis Heights, it became clear that a decisive engagement was inevitable. Burgoyne recognized that the American defenses, under General Horatio Gates, were formidable. Gates had positioned his forces along a ridge overlooking the Hudson River, where they had constructed strong fortifications designed by the skilled Polish engineer Thaddeus Kosciuszko. These defenses provided the Americans with a significant tactical advantage, making any frontal assault on their lines costly and dangerous. To overcome this challenge, Burgoyne devised a plan to draw the Americans out of their fortified positions and engage them on more favorable ground. The British plan for the battle was complex and involved a three-pronged advance. Burgoyne divided his army into several columns to probe the American defenses and locate weak points. The main thrust of the British attack would be led by General Simon Fraser, who commanded a contingent of elite light infantry and marksmen. Fraser's force was ordered to move along the western side of the American position, seeking to outflank their defenses and strike from the rear. Meanwhile, Burgoyne himself led the central column, composed of British regulars and German Hessian mercenaries, along the road toward Freeman's Farm, a small clearing on the outskirts of the American lines. A third column, led by Baron Riedesel, followed a route along the Hudson River to protect the British supply lines and provide additional support if needed. Burgoyne's plan relied on careful coordination between these three columns, but the dense forests and rough terrain made communication difficult. The American forces, though operating from a defensive position, were not content to sit idle. General Benedict Arnold, serving under Gates, pushed for a more aggressive strategy. While Gates preferred to hold the defensive lines and wait for the British to attack, Arnold argued that a bold strike on the advancing British columns could disrupt their plans and weaken their army. Though their disagreements over strategy caused tension between the two commanders, Gates eventually allowed Arnold to dispatch a force to confront Burgoyne's advancing troops. On the morning of September 19th, as Burgoyne's columns advanced cautiously through the dense woods, American scouts spotted their movements and relayed the information back to Arnold. In response, Arnold sent Colonel Daniel Morgan and his elite corps of riflemen to intercept the British at Freeman's Farm. Morgan's men, renowned for their accuracy and unconventional tactics, were well suited for the kind of woodland combat that would soon erupt. These sharpshooters were not traditional line soldiers. They specialized in guerrilla warfare, using the forest for cover while targeting British officers and key personnel. As the British central column emerged into the clearing at Freeman's Farm, Morgan's riflemen struck with deadly precision. Their opening volleys inflicted heavy casualties on the British officers, throwing the advancing ranks into confusion. Burgoyne's troops, though surprised, quickly regrouped and began to press forward in disciplined formations. What followed was a brutal and chaotic battle as both sides fought fiercely for control of the open ground. The forest echoed with the crack of musket fire, the boom of cannons, and the cries of wounded soldiers. Throughout the afternoon, the battle ebbed and flowed as waves of American and British forces clashed in the dense woods surrounding Freeman's Farm. General Fraser's flanking column, moving through the forest to the west, attempted to reinforce Burgoyne's position and outmaneuver the Americans. However, the terrain slowed their progress, and Arnold responded by sending additional American troops to meet this threat. The fighting grew more intense as reinforcements poured in on both sides, turning the woodland into a chaotic battlefield. Despite their superior numbers, the British faced severe challenges. The dense forest negated many of their tactical advantages, preventing them from effectively using their artillery and cavalry. American riflemen, concealed by the trees, continued to target officers and disrupt British formations. Meanwhile, the Americans benefited from fighting on familiar ground and received a steady stream of reinforcements as local militia arrived to join the battle. One of the most pivotal moments of the battle occurred when Benedict Arnold, frustrated by Gates's cautious approach, took personal command of some of the American units. Arnold's bold leadership and aggressive tactics inspired his troops to press the attack, further destabilizing the British lines. His ability to quickly adapt to the changing dynamics of the battlefield allowed the Americans to maintain pressure on the British throughout the day. By nightfall, the fighting finally began to subside. Both sides had suffered significant casualties, but the battle had not delivered the decisive victory Burgoyne had hoped for. Although the British held the field at the end of the day, their advance had been slowed and their forces weakened. The Americans, while technically withdrawing to their defensive positions at Bemis Heights, considered the battle a moral and strategic victory. They had demonstrated that they could hold their ground against the highly trained British Army, and the fierce resistance at Freeman's farm shattered Burgoyne's belief that the American forces would crumble under pressure. The outcome of the Battle of Freeman's farm had far-reaching consequences for the Saratoga campaign. Burgoyne's army, already struggling with dwindling supplies and stretched communication lines, was now trapped in hostile territory with no reinforcements from General Howe. Meanwhile, the American forces grew stronger as word of their successful defense spread, drawing even more volunteers to Gates's camp. The battle also deepened the rift between Gates and Arnold. Despite Arnold's instrumental role in leading successful counterattacks, Gates downplayed his contributions in official reports. This tension would continue to grow in the days to come, eventually leading to one of the most dramatic personal conflicts within the American leadership. As the battered armies settled in for what would become a tense standoff, it was clear that the fight for Saratoga was far from over. The Battle of Freeman's Farm was only the beginning of a larger struggle that would ultimately decide the fate of Burgoyne's ambitious campaign, and in many ways, the future of the American Revolution itself. The Second Battle of Saratoga, known as the Battle of Bemis Heights, was the climactic confrontation between the British forces under General John Burgoyne and the American forces led by General Horatio Gates. Taking place on October 7, 1777, this battle was a turning point in the American Revolutionary War, representing a decisive blow to the British invasion of upstate New York. After weeks of tension, skirmishes, and mounting pressure, both armies understood that the fate of the campaign, and possibly the entire war, hinged on the outcome of this battle. By early October, Burgoyne's situation had grown increasingly desperate. His original plan to advance south and capture Albany relied on coordinated support from other British forces, particularly General William Howe, who was supposed to move north from New York City. However, unknown to Burgoyne, Howe decided to march on Philadelphia instead, leaving Burgoyne isolated deep in enemy territory. Additionally, Colonel Barry St. Ledger's attempt to approach from the west had failed after fierce American resistance at Fort Stanwix. This meant Burgoyne's army, originally numbering around 8,000 troops, was left to face the growing American forces alone. Supply shortages compounded Burgoyne's problems. The British had advanced far from their supply bases in Canada, and American militia forces continually harassed their supply lines, cutting off food and ammunition. The wilderness of upstate New York was unforgiving. British soldiers were exhausted, malnourished, and struggling to survive. Meanwhile, the American camp at Bemis Heights was steadily growing in size and strength. Local militia and Continental Army reinforcements, inspired by the Americans' successful stand at Freeman's farm, poured into the camp daily. By October, Gates commanded more than 12,000 soldiers, giving the Americans a significant numerical advantage over Burgoyne's dwindling forces. Facing these mounting challenges, Burgoyne knew that time was running out. With winter approaching and his supply lines stretched to the breaking point, he made a fateful decision. He would launch a reconnaissance in force against the American defenses at Bemis Heights. This was not a full-scale assault, but rather an attempt to probe the American lines, assess their strength, and possibly force a breakthrough. If successful, Burgoyne hoped to open a path to Albany, or at least find a defensible position where his army could hold out until reinforcements arrived. On the morning of October 7th, Burgoyne sent a 1,500-man force under General Simon Fraser, Baron Riedesel, and Lord Bulcaris to advance toward the American positions. This contingent included a mix of British regulars, German Hessians, and Loyalist militia, supported by 10 artillery pieces. Their objective was to occupy a strategic clearing on the western edge of Bemis Heights, from which they could fire upon the American defenses and test their resolve. However, the Americans, well aware of the British movements thanks to their superior intelligence network, were prepared to meet the attack. The battle began in the early afternoon when the British forces advanced into the clearing. Almost immediately, American sharpshooters led by Colonel Daniel Morgan began firing on the exposed British troops. Morgan's riflemen, known for their accuracy and guerrilla tactics, targeted British officers to disrupt command and create confusion. The first volleys were devastating. British lines wavered as their leaders fell, and the carefully planned advance faltered under heavy fire. Sensing an opportunity, General Benedict Arnold, still technically under Gates's command despite their personal rivalry, urged Gates to authorize a counterattack. Though Gates was hesitant and preferred to remain on the defensive, Arnold's insistence paid off. Gates reluctantly allowed Arnold to lead Morgan's riflemen and additional Continental forces in an aggressive counteroffensive. Arnold, known for his bold and impulsive leadership style, seized the moment and personally directed his men into the thick of the fighting. The American counterattack struck with overwhelming force. Morgan's riflemen targeted Fraser's wing, while New England militia and Continental regulars surged forward to engage the Hessians and British line infantry. The dense woodland surrounding Bemis Heights turned the battle into a series of close-quarter skirmishes where American soldiers, familiar with the terrain, had a significant advantage. Burgoyne's forces, already weakened by weeks of hardship, struggled to hold their ground as wave after wave of Americans pressed the attack. One of the most pivotal moments of the battle came when General Simon Fraser, one of the British Army's most capable field commanders, was mortally wounded. Recognizing Fraser's crucial role in maintaining British cohesion, Colonel Morgan ordered his best marksmen to focus on him. Around mid-afternoon, Fraser was struck by a rifle shot and fell from his horse. His death created panic among the British ranks, as the loss of such a respected leader weakened morale and caused disorder in their formations. Without Fraser's leadership, the British right wing began to collapse under American pressure. As the British lines crumbled, Arnold personally led a daring charge against a key defensive position known as the Breyman Redoubt, a fortified outpost held by German troops under Colonel Heinrich Breyman. Despite having no formal orders, Arnold recognized that capturing the redoubt would cut off the British retreat and trap Burgoyne's army. In a dramatic display of courage, Arnold led his troops through intense musket and cannon fire, inspiring his men to overrun the position. During the assault, Arnold was seriously wounded in the leg, the same leg he had injured during the invasion of Canada in 1775. Though badly hurt, his leadership proved decisive. The Breyman Redoubt fell, and the British retreat was thrown into chaos. By nightfall, the battlefield at Bemis Heights belonged to the Americans. Burgoyne's forces, battered and demoralized, withdrew in disarray toward their encampment. The failure of the reconnaissance mission left Burgoyne with no viable options. He was now surrounded on three sides, his supplies nearly exhausted, and his hopes of reinforcements dashed. The once confident British Army was now trapped and facing inevitable surrender. The Second Battle of Saratoga was a devastating blow to the British. It marked not only a tactical victory for the American forces, but also a strategic turning point in the war. Burgoyne's inability to break through the American lines or secure a route to Albany meant that his campaign had effectively collapsed. The bold leadership of Benedict Arnold and the relentless determination of the American troops proved that the Continental Army was capable of standing toe-to-toe with the world's most powerful military force. The outcome of the battle also had far-reaching consequences beyond the immediate battlefield. It demonstrated to the world, particularly France, that the American cause was both viable and worth supporting. With Burgoyne's army on the brink of surrender, the American victory at Bemis Heights would soon resonate across the Atlantic, changing the course of the Revolutionary War forever. The surrender of General John Burgoyne on October 17, 1777, marked a pivotal moment in the American Revolutionary War and was the culmination of months of fighting, strategic maneuvering, and overwhelming American resistance. Following the crushing defeat at the Second Battle of Saratoga on October 7th, Burgoyne found himself in an untenable position. The situation had gone from bad to worse for the British general, and the path to victory was no longer visible. The Saratoga campaign, which had initially seemed like a promising British effort to divide the colonies and crush the American rebellion, was now unraveling in spectacular fashion. Burgoyne's army, once numbering around 8,000 soldiers, had been reduced to a fraction of its original strength due to casualties, desertions, and the growing pressure from American forces. The soldiers under his command were exhausted from weeks of hard marching, constant harassment by American militias, and severe shortages of food and supplies. The British advance had stalled at the crucial moment, and after the Battle of Bemis Heights, Burgoyne's situation had become increasingly dire. His army was now cut off from retreat and reinforcements, surrounded on three sides by American forces. The first real signs that Burgoyne's defeat was imminent came when the British supply lines were completely severed by the American militia. These forces, led by General Benedict Arnold, had harassed British foraging parties, ambushed small contingents of British soldiers, and continually disrupted Burgoyne's ability to maintain his forces in the field. With the harsh winter rapidly approaching and the prospect of even more American reinforcements flooding into the region, Burgoyne's prospects were grim. Furthermore, the failure of his army to link up with British forces from the south, particularly General William Howe's army, left him isolated and increasingly vulnerable. The American forces, under the command of General Horatio Gates, were not only well-positioned but also benefited from the superior intelligence network of local militias and sympathizers. These volunteers had made life unbearable for the British. The militia had cut off any hope of resupply and had made it impossible for Burgoyne to access the resources needed to sustain his army. As his forces grew weaker and more desperate, the realization set in that retreat was no longer an option. For Burgoyne, his best hope now was to seek a negotiated settlement to avoid complete destruction. The Americans, for their part, had no intention of allowing Burgoyne to escape. Gates's forces were strong, disciplined, and ready to continue pressing the advantage. However, there was still a sense of diplomacy at play. Aware of the importance of this victory, Gates sought to offer Burgoyne an opportunity to surrender in the hope of achieving a decisive and honorable outcome without further bloodshed. The process of surrender, while conducted in a dignified manner, was a direct result of the British failure to break through the American defenses at Bemis Heights and the subsequent collapse of their morale. On the morning of October 17th, General Burgoyne formally requested a meeting with General Gates. The terms of the surrender were carefully negotiated. While Burgoyne was forced to agree to the Americans' conditions, he did so with the understanding that his army would be allowed to return to England, though at the cost of their arms, artillery, and military supplies. The British forces, now at the mercy of the Americans, were required to march out of their camp, lay down their arms, and sign an agreement to leave the conflict entirely. For Burgoyne, this was the best possible option, as the alternative was total destruction or capture. The surrender of Burgoyne's army was far more than just a military defeat. It was an undeniable blow to British prestige and a significant moral victory for the American cause. The British had suffered a humiliating loss at Saratoga, and the defeat would have lasting consequences for the strategy of the British military. No longer could they rely on the hope that one decisive blow would end the rebellion. The American forces had proven that they could stand toe-to-toe with the British Army, even against seemingly overwhelming odds. In the wake of Burgoyne's surrender, the American Revolution would never be the same. The victory at Saratoga was widely regarded as a turning point in the war, and it had far-reaching diplomatic consequences. News of the British defeat traveled swiftly, and it had a profound impact on the international stage. Perhaps most importantly, it convinced the French government that the American cause was not only sustainable but also worthy of their support. The French, long sympathetic to the American struggle but hesitant to openly involve themselves in the war, were now convinced that an American victory was possible. As a result, in February 1778, France signed a treaty of alliance with the United States, providing crucial military and financial aid that would turn the tide of the war. Burgoyne's surrender was also a massive propaganda victory for the Americans. It showcased the unity and resilience of the Continental Army and its ability to not only repel but decisively defeat one of the British Army's most experienced commanders. The victory helped to solidify General Gates's reputation as a capable leader and, for a time, made him one of the most celebrated figures of the Revolution. However, it was also a bittersweet victory for Benedict Arnold, whose personal rivalry with Gates would continue to fester in the aftermath of the surrender. Despite his crucial role in the victory, Arnold was sidelined and denied the recognition he felt he deserved. This sense of personal grievance would eventually lead Arnold to make the fateful decision to betray the American cause. The Saratoga surrender had a ripple effect that would be felt for years to come. Burgoyne's failure would shape British strategy throughout the remainder of the war. The British would increasingly turn their attention to fighting a defensive war in the southern colonies and attempt to gain control of important cities such as Charleston and Savannah, rather than continuing to press forward with a costly invasion of the northern colonies. For the Americans, the surrender was an affirmation that they could win the war and secure their independence. It breathed new life into the revolutionary cause and bolstered the resolve of George Washington and his Continental Army, who, while still struggling at Valley Forge, now had the confidence of a victorious nation. The surrender at Saratoga also directly affected the international aspect of the war. In addition to French support, the Dutch and Spanish governments began to consider the possibility of aiding the American cause. The French alliance was particularly significant, as France provided not only troops and military advisors, but also a much-needed infusion of funds. The financial backing from France allowed the Americans to continue their efforts, build their army, and secure the necessary resources to sustain their struggle. The defeat of Burgoyne had, in essence, turned the tide of the war by drawing Europe into the conflict and making the American Revolution a truly global struggle. Thus, the surrender at Saratoga marked the beginning of the end of the British campaign to crush the American rebellion in the northern colonies. It was a moment of both military triumph and diplomatic victory that would forever alter the course of history. The American victory at Saratoga in 1777 had profound and far-reaching consequences that reshaped the course of the American Revolution and changed the trajectory of global history. The events leading up to and following the Saratoga campaign were not only significant military victories, but also a key turning point that elevated the American cause to a level of credibility and legitimacy that it had not previously possessed. The Saratoga campaign demonstrated that the American forces were capable of standing toe-to-toe with the British Army, challenging the dominant military power of the 18th century. However, it was not just a tactical or strategic success. It also led to a powerful political and diplomatic transformation that brought international recognition and crucial foreign aid to the fledgling United States. Before Saratoga, the American Revolution had been a struggle between the American colonies and the British Empire, characterized by intermittent military engagements and local victories. However, the Continental Army, led by General George Washington, had been in a constant state of struggle, facing defeats at various points in the war, including major setbacks such as the Battle of Long Island and the retreat through New Jersey. Despite the courage and resilience of the American forces, it had been difficult for the revolutionaries to secure widespread international support, as many European powers were hesitant to openly back the rebellion without assurances of its success. The Saratoga victory provided the proof needed to sway public opinion and foreign governments in favor of the American cause. Perhaps the most immediate and significant consequence of the victory was the formal alliance between France and the United States. For years, France had been secretly supplying the American rebels with arms, ammunition, and military supplies, as the French government viewed the American struggle as an opportunity to weaken their longtime enemy, Britain. However, the French government had been reluctant to enter the war openly and risk direct confrontation with Britain, a power they knew could retaliate in various ways. Saratoga changed that calculus. The victory was a clear demonstration that the American forces could not only hold their own but could achieve decisive victories over the British. This success gave France the confidence it needed to enter into a formal alliance with the Americans, signed in February 1778. The Treaty of Alliance was a monumental step for the United States as it provided vital military and financial aid, including the sending of French troops, naval forces, military advisors, and much-needed funds to support the American effort. The French involvement in the American Revolution was transformative. France's support helped tip the balance of power in the conflict, providing the Americans with critical resources that they could not have otherwise obtained. The French Navy, which was one of the most powerful in the world at the time, played a key role in preventing British forces from resupplying and reinforcing their armies. French troops, such as Marquis de Lafayette, also directly participated in the fighting, contributing their expertise and resources to the American cause. The French monarchy's backing emboldened the Americans and helped solidify the perception that their victory was not only possible but likely. Furthermore, France's entry into the war led to the formation of a broader coalition of European powers, including Spain and the Dutch Republic, which further isolated Britain diplomatically. The resulting global conflict stretched British resources thin, forcing them to fight a war on multiple fronts and ultimately weakening their ability to concentrate efforts on crushing the American Revolution. Another consequence of the Saratoga victory was its profound effect on the political climate within the colonies. The victory at Saratoga proved to the American people, as well as the Continental Congress, that the cause for independence was not a hopeless endeavor. It instilled a renewed sense of optimism and national pride among the population, showing that the Continental Army could defeat a professional and well-equipped military force. Prior to Saratoga, there had been significant doubts, both within the ranks of the American Army and the civilian population, about the viability of the revolution. The victory gave a much-needed boost to morale at a crucial moment in the war, especially as Washington's army was struggling at Valley Forge and the harsh winter of 1777 to 1778. The success at Saratoga galvanized American support for the war effort, and the sense of unity among the colonies strengthened. The Saratoga victory also had a significant impact on the leadership of the Continental Army. General Horatio Gates, who had been instrumental in planning and overseeing the American defense during the Saratoga campaign, was widely celebrated for his victory. Gates was hailed as a hero, and his reputation skyrocketed following the surrender of Burgoyne's army. However, it is important to note that Gates's relationship with Benedict Arnold, one of the most controversial figures in the American Revolution, was deeply strained. Arnold's bold leadership and courage in the battles at Freeman's Farm and Bemis Heights had played a critical role in securing the victory, yet he was sidelined after the battle by Gates, who took credit for the triumph. Arnold's personal grievances and frustration with the lack of recognition ultimately led him to betray the American cause in 1780 when he defected to the British side. The personal dynamics between Gates and Arnold after Saratoga highlighted the complex nature of leadership in wartime and the sometimes fragile relationships within military hierarchies. Internationally, the impact of Saratoga was felt far beyond France. The Spanish Empire and the Dutch Republic, both of which had long-standing hostilities with Britain, began to extend covert aid to the American cause as well. Spain, in particular, offered financial assistance, while the Dutch provided loans and also served as a conduit for military supplies from France. Additionally, Spain, under King Charles III, became involved in the conflict indirectly by declaring war on Britain in 1779, which further drained British resources and forced Britain to defend its global empire. The involvement of these European powers in the American Revolution further isolated Britain diplomatically and militarily, making it more difficult for them to focus on defeating the rebellion in North America. Furthermore, the Saratoga victory helped to promote American unity and the idea of a nation born out of shared values. With the success at Saratoga, the United States began to present itself not just as a collection of colonies fighting for independence, but as a legitimate, unified nation with its own identity. The victory was symbolic of the colony's ability to unite and confront a common enemy, and it provided a rallying point for soldiers, civilians, and diplomats alike. It was an affirmation that the dream of independence was real and that it was achievable. The American Revolution began to attract more than just international sympathizers. It began to inspire people around the world who saw the success of a small, emerging nation against a global superpower as evidence that revolutions could succeed. The ideas of liberty, freedom, and self-governance were echoed not only in the halls of American political discourse, but also in revolutionary movements across Europe and Latin America in the years to come. The Saratoga victory also shaped the trajectory of American diplomacy in the years following the surrender of Burgoyne. It established the United States as a legitimate player on the international stage, a nation worthy of recognition and support. The success of the American Revolution would ultimately have a lasting impact on the development of international law and the concepts of sovereignty and national independence. The example set by the American colonies in fighting and winning against one of the greatest military powers of the time would influence future movements for self-determination around the globe. In conclusion, the victory at Saratoga was not merely a military achievement. It was a multifaceted event that reverberated throughout the American Revolution and the broader world. It signaled to foreign powers that the American cause was serious and worthy of support, particularly from France, which played a crucial role in the revolution's success. The victory inspired American unity, strengthened the resolve of the Continental Army, and changed the political and military landscape for both the American colonies and the British Empire. As a turning point in the Revolution, it set the stage for the eventual American independence and would go down in history as one of the most consequential events in the fight for freedom. The legacy of the Battle of Saratoga extends far beyond the immediate military and diplomatic outcomes of the confrontation. The battle, and more specifically, the surrender of General John Burgoyne and his forces on October 17, 1777, marked a pivotal turning point in the American Revolutionary War and would resonate throughout the subsequent history of the United States. Saratoga symbolized not just a moment of military triumph, but also the resilience and enduring spirit of a fledgling nation that was determined to break free from the chains of colonialism and assert its independence on the world stage. The battle's profound impact can be seen in its lasting influence on American national identity, military strategy, foreign relations, and the development of revolutionary ideals that would go on to shape the future of the United States and the broader world. First and foremost, the victory at Saratoga gave rise to a newfound sense of national identity among the American people. Prior to Saratoga, the American colonies were a collection of disparate entities, each with its own local concerns, interests, and aspirations. While there was shared frustration with British rule, the colonies had yet to fully coalesce into a unified force working toward the common goal of independence. The victory at Saratoga gave the Continental Army, and by extension, the American cause, a sense of legitimacy and unity. It was a clear demonstration that a ragtag group of colonists, often considered ill-equipped and untrained by their British counterparts, could challenge the greatest military power of the time and emerge victorious. This realization helped to solidify the idea that the American colonies could stand independently, both militarily and politically. The battle fostered a sense of shared purpose and pride in the fledgling nation's ability to overcome adversity. Moreover, Saratoga served as a model of military strategy and leadership that would influence not only future generations of Americans, but also military thinkers around the world. The American forces, under the leadership of General Horatio Gates and aided by the aggressive tactics of Benedict Arnold, demonstrated the power of guerrilla warfare, mobilizing local militias and strategic positioning against a superior enemy force. The Americans, despite being outnumbered and less well-equipped than their British counterparts, used the terrain, local knowledge, and an understanding of British weaknesses to their advantage. The tactics employed at Saratoga, especially the use of hit-and-run attacks, fortifications, and superior knowledge of the local landscape, would become key elements of future American military strategies. The battle also underscored the importance of leadership, as the American commanders were able to maintain morale and cohesion despite the challenges they faced. Even though General Gates was credited with the victory, the actions of Benedict Arnold were crucial to the American success at Saratoga, and his role in the battle, despite being overshadowed later by his betrayal, highlighted the importance of bold and decisive leadership on the battlefield. The Saratoga victory also had profound implications for American diplomacy and the recognition of the United States by foreign powers. Before the battle, the United States was largely isolated on the international stage, and many foreign nations were reluctant to openly support the American cause. The victory at Saratoga changed that dynamic. When word of the American success reached Europe, it sent a powerful message to foreign powers, particularly France, that the Americans were capable of winning the war and achieving independence. As a result, France's decision to formally ally with the United States was one of the most significant consequences of Saratoga. This alliance, sealed by the Treaty of Alliance in 1778, provided the American Revolution with the resources, military support, and legitimacy it desperately needed. French military aid, including the sending of troops, naval support, and financial resources, was critical to the eventual success of the American cause. Additionally, other European nations, including Spain and the Dutch Republic, began to offer support in various forms, either through covert aid or by directly challenging British interests around the world. This broadened the conflict into a truly global war and forced Britain to fight on multiple fronts, thereby weakening its ability to decisively end the American Revolution. The Saratoga victory thus helped to internationalize the conflict and transformed the United States into a recognized player on the world stage. The battle's impact was also felt deeply in the broader ideological landscape. Saratoga exemplified the resilience of democratic ideals that were central to the American Revolution. The American Revolution, which had begun as a protest against the perceived tyranny of the British monarchy, was now taking shape as a movement that was advocating for the broader principles of freedom, self-determination, and popular sovereignty. The victory at Saratoga helped to inspire those who were watching the revolution unfold, both in the American colonies and abroad. The idea that a people could rise up against a colonial power and establish a government based on the consent of the governed became an enduring symbol of hope and possibility for other revolutionary movements throughout history. In this regard, Saratoga represented not just a military victory but also a statement of principle about the power of self-rule and the right of individuals to govern themselves without foreign interference. The legacy of Saratoga would resonate with the French Revolution in 1789 and other subsequent independence movements across the world. Furthermore, the Battle of Saratoga had a lasting influence on the internal politics and governance of the United States. The success at Saratoga helped to solidify the power and influence of the Continental Congress at a time when the fledgling government was still struggling to maintain control over the various states. The victory reinforced the idea that a united American effort, under the leadership of the Congress, could succeed in the face of overwhelming odds. The victory also highlighted the importance of coordinated military strategy and centralized leadership, even though the implementation of these strategies was often difficult in the context of the decentralized nature of the Continental Congress. In the years that followed, the American government would continue to evolve and experiment with different forms of governance, eventually leading to the drafting of the U.S. Constitution in 1787. However, the enduring spirit of unity and determination that emerged from Saratoga would continue to influence the direction of American political thought and governance for decades to come. The legacy of Saratoga is also deeply tied to the cultural memory of the American Revolution. The battle became a symbol of American strength and resolve, a narrative that would be woven into the fabric of the nation's story. As Americans looked back on their revolution, Saratoga was one of the key moments that highlighted the country's ability to defeat a powerful imperial adversary. The battle was immortalized in the public consciousness as a moment when the ideals of liberty, self-determination, and national sovereignty triumphed over tyranny. Monuments, historical sites, and memorials commemorating the victory at Saratoga were established in the years following the revolution, underscoring the significance of the battle in shaping the nation's identity. Over time, The victory became one of the foundational myths of American exceptionalism, reinforcing the belief that the United States was destined to play a unique role in the world. Lastly, the impact of Saratoga on the Continental Army's morale and structure cannot be overstated. The victory at Saratoga provided a much-needed boost to the American forces who were enduring significant hardships, particularly during the difficult winter at Valley Forge. The confidence instilled by Saratoga would help the Continental Army continue its struggle throughout the war, eventually leading to final victory at Yorktown in 1781. Moreover, the successful collaboration between regular army troops and militia forces at Saratoga set a precedent for future coordination between these different branches of the American military. This collaboration would prove essential as the war continued, and it helped to foster a sense of shared purpose between different factions within the American military. In conclusion, the Battle of Saratoga stands as one of the most important moments in the history of the American Revolution. It provided the American cause with a critical military victory, paved the way for foreign alliances, and established the United States as a legitimate force on the world stage. The battle's legacy can be seen in the development of American national identity, military strategy, diplomacy, and democratic ideals. As a defining moment in history, Saratoga helped to lay the groundwork for the establishment of the United States as an independent nation and served as a beacon of hope for future movements seeking freedom and self-determination. The Saratoga Campaign of 1777, culminating in the surrender of British General John Burgoyne on October 17, 1777, was not merely a military victory for the American Continental Army. It became one of the most crucial events in shaping the future of the United States. The success of the Americans in the Battle of Saratoga did far more than turn the tide of the war. It fundamentally altered the course of the American Revolution, laid the foundation for the emergence of the United States as a sovereign nation, and established enduring principles of independence, democracy, and self-determination that would continue to resonate long after the Revolution's conclusion. The immediate impact of the victory at Saratoga was deeply felt by both the American people and their leadership. Before the battle, the colonial cause faced numerous challenges, including widespread skepticism about the feasibility of winning the war against one of the world's greatest military powers. The Continental Army, under the leadership of General George Washington, had suffered significant setbacks and morale was low. Saratoga, however, became a symbol of hope and triumph, serving as proof that the American Revolution was not only possible, but also practical. The victory gave both soldiers and civilians renewed faith in the cause of independence and strengthened the resolve to continue fighting against the British. The emotional and psychological boost provided by Saratoga was vital, especially as the war would drag on for several more years. However, the impact of Saratoga was not just a matter of morale. It also shifted the balance of power within the American forces and between the Americans and the British. Prior to Saratoga, the British had maintained a strategic initiative, controlling key cities and strongholds along the eastern seaboard. The British strategy had been to divide and conquer, focusing on cutting off the New England colonies from the rest of the rebel territories. Burgoyne's campaign, which was part of this larger British strategy, failed at Saratoga, and his defeat effectively dismantled the British plan to separate New England from the rest of the colonies. The defeat forced the British to reassess their entire military strategy and shifted the momentum of the war into the hands of the Americans. The victory at Saratoga allowed the Americans to maintain control of the northern colonies and bolster their position in the struggle for independence. The most far-reaching consequence of the Saratoga victory was the direct impact it had on American diplomacy and foreign relations. For the United States, the most immediate and transformative result of the battle was the ability to secure international recognition and support. The French government, which had been secretly assisting the American cause with supplies and arms, had hesitated to commit to open involvement for fear of provoking Britain into war. After the victory at Saratoga, France, encouraged by the success and emboldened by the possibility of a victorious American Revolution, signed the Treaty of Alliance with the United States in 1778. This treaty was a turning point, marking the beginning of formal French support for the American cause. France provided the Continental Army with vital troops, military supplies, and naval assistance, and its involvement helped to tip the balance of power in the war. The French alliance also led to the formation of a broader coalition against Britain. Spain and the Dutch Republic also began to provide indirect support to the Americans. The Spanish government, under King Charles III, took action to weaken British influence by declaring war on Britain in 1779 and providing crucial financial resources to the American cause. The Dutch extended financial assistance to the Americans, and their support helped to establish essential trade routes and networks that allowed the United States to continue the fight. This created a truly global war, with Britain now fighting on multiple fronts against a coalition of European powers. The defeat of Burgoyne at Saratoga thus not only secured French aid, but also paved the way for a broader international alignment that isolated Britain diplomatically and drained its resources. This diplomatic success would have a lasting impact on the outcome of the war, as the combined forces of the French, Spanish, and Dutch would stretch British military efforts too thin to sustain the conflict. In addition to its diplomatic and military effects, the Saratoga campaign also had a profound impact on the political evolution of the United States. Prior to the battle, the Continental Congress was struggling to assert its authority and effectively governed the disparate colonies. The victory at Saratoga gave the Continental Congress the legitimacy it had long desired. It provided the Congress with a concrete example of success and proved that the efforts of the Continental Army, under its guidance, could lead to victory over the British. This newfound credibility allowed the Congress to gain greater control over the war effort, improve coordination between the states, and ultimately lay the groundwork for the formation of a unified government. While Saratoga itself did not immediately resolve all of the challenges the United States would face in a war, it gave the fledgling country a boost in political confidence and a clearer sense of purpose. Moreover, the victory at Saratoga had a lasting effect on the military structure and tactics of the Continental Army. The American forces had demonstrated tactical ingenuity and the ability to adapt to the unique challenges of the war. The use of guerrilla tactics, combined with traditional military strategies, allowed the Americans to outmaneuver the British forces and trap them in strategic locations. Benedict Arnold's key role in the success of the campaign, despite his later defection, demonstrated the importance of bold leadership and tactical innovation. His contributions at Freeman's Farm and Bemis Heights helped to transform the course of the battle and set a precedent for future American commanders. The ability of the Americans to adapt to battlefield realities and use the terrain to their advantage became a defining characteristic of American military strategy. Saratoga showcased the potential for smaller, more nimble forces to challenge a larger and better-equipped adversary, a lesson that would serve the United States well in the years to come. The legacy of Saratoga was not only felt during the American Revolution, but also had long-lasting effects on the development of the United States as a nation-state. The battle helped to crystallize the idea of a unified nation fighting for its independence and its place in the world. Prior to Saratoga, the notion of a united American republic was still in its infancy. The victory over the British proved that the American colonies were capable of achieving their goals through collective action and shared determination. Saratoga became a symbol of the resilience and strength of the American spirit, and it reinforced the notion that the United States was destined to be a nation of free people. The victory laid the ideological groundwork for the formation of a new republic, founded on democratic principles, individual liberties, and a rejection of monarchical rule. Saratoga also contributed to the broader concept of revolution that would have a profound impact on the subsequent political developments in both Europe and the Americas. The success of the American Revolution inspired numerous other movements for self-determination and independence across the world. The principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity espoused by the American revolutionaries resonated with revolutionary movements in France, Latin America, and the Caribbean, where oppressed peoples sought to overthrow colonial powers and establish self-governance. The legacy of Saratoga, in particular, inspired French revolutionaries who would go on to challenge their own monarchy just a decade later. The idea that a small, colonized group of people could rise up against a mighty imperial power and prevail became a beacon of hope for those seeking to overthrow oppressive systems of government. Finally, the Battle of Saratoga also left its mark on the historical memory of the American Revolution. The victory at Saratoga became one of the defining moments of the Revolution, celebrated and remembered as the moment when the tide of the war turned in favor of the Americans. It was immortalized in American history as a symbol of the nation's ability to overcome adversity and rise to the challenges of independence. Saratoga became a key part of the national mythos, woven into the collective memory of the United States as an example of the perseverance and courage that would come to define the American character. The victory helped to shape the narrative of the Revolution, reinforcing the belief that the United States was destined for greatness and that the American people had the determination and ingenuity to create a nation of their own making. In conclusion, the Saratoga campaign stands as one of the most significant events in American history. It changed the course of the American Revolution, secured critical international support, provided a model of military strategy, and reinforced the ideals of independence, self-determination, and democratic governance. The legacy of Saratoga is not confined to the military or political events of the time, but extends to the broader development of the United States as a nation. The victory shaped the United States' identity, its role in the world, and the enduring principles that would guide it into the future. The battle was a turning point, not only in the war but in the formation of the United States itself. And reflecting upon the significance of the Battle of Saratoga, it becomes clear that this pivotal moment not only altered the trajectory of the American Revolution but also laid the very foundation for the emergence of the United States as an independent and sovereign nation. The victory at Saratoga was not just a military triumph. It was a symbol of the strength, resilience, and determination of a people who, against all odds, fought for their freedom and the right to govern themselves. Saratoga's impact was felt on multiple levels. Diplomatically, it secured critical foreign alliances, particularly with France, which played a decisive role in ensuring the ultimate success of the American cause. Militarily, it demonstrated the effectiveness of American strategy and leadership, inspiring future generations of soldiers and commanders. Politically, it galvanized the American public and proved that the colonies could unite as a cohesive force capable of challenging the might of the British Empire. And ideologically, it reaffirmed the principles of freedom, democracy, and self-determination, which would go on to define the American identity and influence countless movements around the world. The surrender of General Burgoyne at Saratoga marked a turning point not just in the war, but in the collective consciousness of the United States. It was a moment when the impossible seemed suddenly achievable, when the dream of independence felt within reach, and when the world began to take notice of the new force rising in the West. Saratoga proved that the American cause was not a fleeting rebellion, but a legitimate and worthy struggle for liberty and self-rule. In the grand scheme of history, the Battle of Saratoga represents more than just a military victory. It is a testament to the enduring power of hope, unity, and the belief that the pursuit of justice and freedom is worth the sacrifices made along the way. Today, as we reflect on this historic moment, we are reminded that the very principles that led to the triumph at Saratoga continue to guide and inspire not just the United States, but people around the world who yearn for freedom, equality, and the opportunity to chart their own destinies. The Battle of Saratoga is not only a chapter in the history of the American Revolution, it is an integral part of the ongoing story of freedom and the never-ending struggle for a better future.